I am very excited on this episode of Kingdom Creative to have Michael King. Michael King is a phenomenal person, first and foremost, but an executive coach. He has coached Fortune 500 executives. He's built platforms for founders. He's spoken, has his own podcast, does a lot. But what I'm really most excited to talk about today is a particular framework that he's developed that caught my attention that I want him to break down. But first and foremost, Michael, thank you for taking your time to join me and have a conversation.
So great to hang with you again. So thanks for the invite.
Awesome. So me and Michael met down in social media marketing world in San Diego and was introduced by a mutual friend who said, hey, you gotta interview this guy. This guy's got some knowledge and some wisdom that I think would be valuable for what it is that you're doing. And sure enough, I thought maybe I'll just ask him a couple questions. And that couple questions turned into probably about a 30-minute interview in which he was very gracious in breaking down all sorts of things. And some of that we're going to get into today. So, the first thing that I wanted to talk about with you, Michael, is this formula that you broke down. I don't know if this is part of your coaching formula, but you posted it on social media. And it was this: mindset, vision, structure, strategy. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes. Very, very close.
Okay. So I'll let you kind of clean that up. But one of the things that really stood out is the fact that you didn't start with strategy. And I think a lot of people would say, hey, you start with strategy. Can you give us a breakdown of that framework and kind of talk us through what each one of those is?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we've developed around the idea or the concept of the to-be list, not the to-do list, right? So because if you think about it, you're probably wired very similar to me, to where it's like the alarm clock goes off in the morning. I don't know about you, but I wake up usually about 5:30 in the morning. I know that you're probably more of an 11 a.m. wake up guy, but just messing with you. But think about this, right? So the alarm clock goes off in the morning. The first thing that we do is we reach over, we grab our phones from our nightstand or whatever it is that's at the side of our bed. And before our feet even hit the floor, we immediately start scrolling through our to-do list for the day, or even our calendar, to find out all the things that we've committed our time to. And I don't know about you, but man, there's something incredibly painful about the reality that maybe the things that we commit our time to aren't moving the needle, and maybe they don't even matter. But here's the thing: is that if our strategy, if our tactics, if the things that we're committed to, if they're not directly linked as a response to vision, then it's going to be a waste of time. It's not going to move the needle. It's going to be things that maybe in the moment we might deliver on, but long term, it's not going to really be satisfying. So the idea of like starting with a to-be list instead of the to-do list. So what is the to-be list? Well, it really starts with mindset first and foremost. So that's why we say mindset, vision, structure, then strategy. Now, without going like super deep into mindset, okay, what is it? Okay, well, who am I? What do I want to be known for? How do I want to make people feel? What do I do better than anyone else? Like, that's a huge one, right? Not a prideful thing, but just like a reality. Like, okay, how did God make me? And what is a superpower that I bring to the table that might be a little bit different than anyone else? And what's a problem that I really solve? And how do I want to make people feel? So like starting with that, like as a mindset of like going, okay, today we're going to crush it. And then we get into vision. Okay, what do I want the reality of my company? What do I want the reality of my life to look like 3 to 5 years from now? Let's document it. Let's get it out there. And then, okay, great structure. Let's invite the right people along on my path. Like for me this week, I went and I hired, I actually started, like, this is the first time I'm actually talking about this publicly. Is it okay if I drop this?
Let's go.
So I actually hired John Mediana as my new creative director.
Awesome guy. Great guy. Just had him on the podcast as well. Amazing.
So, but that's like a huge swing for our company. We had a vacancy for a while, and I felt like, because again, it's like you are the sum average of the 5 loudest voices in your life, right? And for me, structure is always the limiting barrier to strategy. Like we get so far ahead, and strategy never becomes the thing that we want it to be, because we don't take into account the people that are going to execute it first.
So let me just jump in there real quick, because you said something that I think maybe comes natural to you, right, from all the years of experience, but it really kind of hit me. And that was the idea of structure, having the proper structure before the strategy. In what ways does that structure play a role? And maybe also if you can give us some of the things to look out for when we're trying to develop a good structure for our strategy.
Yeah, I've never met like executives or leaders that absolutely sucked at strategy. I've always met leaders that struggled with execution. And well, then, so we start to think about, okay, well, why do we struggle with execution? It's not just because, it's because number one, we're only one person, like, and depending on your role or depending on whether you're an owner, an entrepreneur, a founder, or an executive, the reality is that we can only do so much. But the reality is that if we're not actually leading people, we're not actually a leader. So you have to keep that in mind, that the strategies, the reason why they're executing and firing on all cylinders, or the reason why they're not, it usually has to do with the people that they're directly attached to, our structure, right? So I think we have to keep that in mind. Number one is that if you're creating strategies in a silo, which by the way, siloed thinking in 2025, dude, don't get stuck in the AI silo. Just don't do it. Like a lot of times, like AI is going to help us move so fast. It's going to help us take so further. But if you're not actually allowing AI to help you influence and steer your structure and steer your team and to help them optimize, but if you're starting to replace your structure with AI, you're going to fail. So just don't get stuck in the AI silo. But think about siloed thinking, right? When it comes to strategy, a lot of times, especially when we get stuck in siloed thinking, we start developing strategies according to the way that we would do it. We're not taking into account the superpowers and the strengths of the people that are actually on our teams, the people that should be executing in the first place. So, so an immediate hack to making sure that your strategies actually get a little bit of traction and making sure that you're optimizing and moving forward better is getting the right people on your team. And we have tons of ways that we can help you do that. But number two, when you're developing strategies, making sure that you're taking into account your structure. I tell people this all the time. I measure success not by the number of hours that we work. I measure success by how many promises that we're able to keep.
That's good. That's really good. And, kind of just touching on this aspect of making sure the right people are in the right places. I know that that's huge. And, there's a lot of times where it's difficult, right? It's something that it's a learned skill to be able to extract those things out of people and identify them. And I know there's a lot of tests out there that people have for trying to discover those. And I think those are great. What are maybe some, practical ways that you can, as a leader, can identify which people are in the right places? Maybe what are some telltale signs that you got a person in the wrong place, or how to quickly identify, on the fly? How would you identify those areas?
We're pretty assessment heavy on the front side of it, especially like with the Enneagram. The Enneagram is huge, by the way, when it comes to the motivations of getting the right people on your team. A significant number of global resources and global revenue is produced by people that are within within the gut triad. Well, why is that? It's because they move fast. They like to show initiative. So taking some things like that into consideration, and by all means, like if you want to see some assessments, just reach out to me. I'll give you a link, and we'll set you and your team up with some assessments for free. But that's just one part of it. So I want to give you these 3 Ps when it comes to getting the right people on your team. And one of these Ps, I can promise you this, is probably before today, you might not even have taken it in consideration. So number one, and this really comes down to when you're going to expend resources to bring on human capital, you're paying for something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
These are transactional relationships that you want to lead into transformational experiences. The reality is that if you just simply lean on a transformational value system of saying, okay, Joe's going to be on my team, as long as he becomes a better person and I become a better person, everybody's going to be happy. Well, no, you're not going to be happy. At the end of the day, the reason why you're trying to scale your team, the reason why you're trying to grow, is because you want to get results from expanding your structure. Would you agree with me on that?
Absolutely.
So, but here are the 3 Ps. Number one is the person. We're paying for the person. So who is the person? Are they a good fit? Do they match the culture? Do they have good character, good chemistry, good competency? Great. Check those boxes by all means. Is there a clear understanding of the job that's at play? Great. Let's go. The second one is the plan. So you're paying for the person and you're paying for the plan. Now, if you know what type of objective you want to accomplish and you know specifically what type of results you want to achieve, give the candidate the opportunity to let them pitch their plan to you as far as how they're actually going to deliver it for you. Because I think at the end of the day, like if you're not clear on what the objective is, as far as like what you want to see the outcome to be, then the candidate's not going to be clear either. And it can't be something like, hey, we're just going to build the plane while it's in the air. You would not believe like how many times I'm sitting in with a team or a leader and they don't necessarily know why they brought a person onto the team. They just simply hired them because they like them and they felt like it was a good person and there was good chemistry. So let's just go ahead and figure this out while we go. You have to build by design.
Well, I would also imagine too, right? Like that's kind of a trait of some of these executive leaders. That's kind of the way they live their lifestyle, right? Is they build it in the air. And so there's kind of this expectation that everybody I bring on kind of needs to function like I do and needs to have this skill of just freestyling stuff and making it work. Have you seen that? Have you came across that as well?
Oh man, absolutely. And I see this, there's a little bit of some PTSD in me in that. So if you hear me leaning a little bit hard on that, is because for a good 2+ decades of my life, I was an executive pastor in the megachurch world. And I was surrounded by people that did not build by design, that they brought people onto the team without having a clear expectation or a clear job function. And they're like, hey, I just like them. Let's just go ahead and let's just find a place for them. But it always, I kid you not, at least 90% of the time, you know, it could be anywhere from 2 months down the road, or it could be years down the road. But there was a level of dissatisfaction, misalignment, sometimes failures and to remove people from those environments after you hired them without expectation, it's almost impossible to off-ramp. It's painful. So just don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, I think there's one P left, right? One more P left.
Yeah. Portfolio. This is the one that we don't think about, especially in 2025. Now, portfolio, so who are the people that they're connected to, and what are resources that they can bring to the table, and what are some hidden skill sets or hidden talents that person has that we want to document, that we want to take into consideration. You might have somebody that's brought onto your team that's going to do an administrative role, but you had no idea this, but they're running a side hustle as an online influencer, and they have a social media following of 1 million people. Great. Awesome. How can you figure out how to use something that person's passionate about in order to unleash them? Portfolio-wise, I just got back from San Diego meeting one of our clients. He's a baller. Like, he's a fantastic leader. But the reason why he's great is because his portfolio, he's connected to high-level investors from people that have money to invest in companies from all over the world. And he's the type of guy that I'm like, okay, great. Like, I want to get you connected to different people. I want to get you integrated into some of our C-suite activities because of the portfolio. So when you're hiring somebody based on those 3 Ps. You're buying a person, you're buying a plan, and you're buying a portfolio. And you have to keep that stuff in mind.
No, that's good. I think that's really good. And that's a great way to think about it, because I'm thinking of it even in my own self in areas where I've been hired. And there are certain areas where I'm hoping that this could be kind of exposed. You know, there's maybe a hidden skill or hidden talent where I'm not being hired for, but I can see a value in integrating it into my role. And because I wasn't hired specifically for that, or they were unaware of that, it never got leveraged, which means that I was never really fully committed to everything, my role and my function. There was a part of me that was kind of disassociated with my role. And so, you know, it kind of got a fragmented result. So I'm always looking for the other side, how that makes a person feel as a leader, not just leading, but also how it feels to be led. And so I think that's I think that's some great insight there. One of the things you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, and I've seen this, and we kind of even talked about this a little bit down in San Diego, was this idea of the balance between responsibility and authority. Can you kind of give us an overview of what that is?
There's really nothing more painful than having a high level of responsibility without the high level of authority to match out. So, because these things have to balance out. They have to. And what ends up happening is if the responsibilities start to rise and the authority starts to dip, the first thing to go away is vision. And
is that vision of the leader or vision of the team?
it could be both. And that's the thing is that like I used to say this a lot. So from a level 2 or a level 3 team player is like you start to see the engagement of the person back away. Like when the responsibility and the authority starts to gap, you're going to see a team stall out. You're going to see a lack of traction. You're going to see stalled processes, horrible communication, lack of engagement. You're going to see the heart of the person. You're going to start to see them burn out. And why is that? Well, it's because it's a painful place to be. And then you have to start questioning, well, why don't I have the authority that matches up with my level of responsibility? Well, it's probably because somewhere along the way there was a misalignment of trust. Maybe somebody's a control freak and higher levels, and they're not actually allowing the authority to be able to make those decisions, or the authority to go along with the responsibility to scale. Because that's hard as a leader. When you finally get to that place where your business, you have to start releasing authority in order for you to move a little bit faster and for you to be more optimized. That's a scary place to be if you've never done it before. And so, but there's another side to that story. There's people that are on your team that feel that. Like I have one person who's a new COO on a team, and she didn't necessarily ask for that job. She was promoted into it. It's a pretty high level construction company, right? And so she's going, I have all these responsibilities, but I don't have any of the authority to make the decision. And so she's feeling slow. She's feeling sluggish. She's feeling like she's not trusted. It has nothing to do with her. It has everything to do with the experience of the senior leader to be able to release those things. Now, in the same way, I'll talk about her because she literally just called me out when she saw that I posted a story about this. But she had accidentally given away the authority to somebody else on her team. And so now her, as the CEO, now all of a sudden she started to feel her responsibility go up and her authority drop. Well, why is that? Well, it's because she accidentally gave away all the authority to one of her operational people internally and just allowed them to have the keys to the kingdom to be able to run things. So I was getting frustrated with her because she was showing up to her coaching calls every week going, I'm like, what's your vision? Where are we going? Let's go ahead and prime this pump. Let's see if we can make this thing happen. And the tank was empty.
Wow. So in that case, how does a person actually get back their authority?
I don't know. I don't know the answers to this one because here's now there's multiple different ways to do it. And so I'm not saying I don't know to be a shock jock, but I'm saying like I'm open to discovering this one probably as long as everyone else. But recognizing number one is that you gave it away is the reason why you feel that gap. And you have to do whatever it takes. In this situation here, the way we rediscovered it is because that person randomly left the team. They quit. And all of a sudden, the next 2 coaching calls, she's showing up full of life. She's got fresh vision, and she's ready to 10X this year. And I'm going, what in the world is going on here? And so I'm laying in bed at night thinking about this stuff. And I'm going, oh, that's what happened. That's what happened. That number 2 was actually not helping. They inadvertently, their personality was too big. They were a little bit too flamboyant, maybe a little bit too boisterous, and the CEO accidentally gave away too much authority. And so now she's trying to find her balance again. But I think the first step is just recognizing that. It's like, man, if your vision tank is empty, ask yourself this one single question today. Who'd you give your authority away to? And what are you going to do to get it back?
Wow, that's powerful. So, I know a lot of times in, leadership circles and executive leadership, there's a lot of talk about influence, right? Being able to influence people, being able to influence outcomes, being able to influence vision and all sorts of those things. And I'm not sure how closely it's related to the idea of responsibility and authority. I would imagine that there's some connection there. But my question to you would be, kind of similar to the authority thing, but now speaking more of influence. If a leader loses some of their influence, what is a way or some steps or some tips that they can reclaim some of their influence on their team in order to hopefully get things done and lead the way?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. here's how I answer that: is that credibility is the new charisma. Think about that. Credibility is the new charisma. You know, it would not surprise you to find out that I think it's 78% of most executives that I end up coaching, whether in the Fortune 500 or 100 vertical, most of them have the makeup on the Enneagram of either being 7s or 8s or 1s. So high-level enthusiasts, high-level challenger, high-level reformers. And so it used to be like the style of leadership from the 1980s and 90s to the 2000s, you know, it's kind of like the Jeffrey Hazlitt's, from the C-suite, former CMO of Eastman Kodak, really, really big, bombastic, charismatic personalities were leaving the way. It's always like the idea that the loud people were the ones that were making all the money. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Right. Yeah.
But what ends up happening is that over a period of time, that does wear on an organization. Like if you're not getting the results to back up the big megaphones, you know, it's eventually your credibility is going to take a hit. So so your question is saying, okay, what can a leader do to be able to get some of that influence back? Find out the things that you gave away, or find out the things that you've been executing in that aren't your thing.
That's good. How about for maybe also too, is that something they need to find out for their team as well? Like maybe there's some team members that kind of just, you know, through necessity, needing to get things done, have maybe slipped into some roles or positions that's just kind of stagnating the influential train. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think because there's organizational influence, and then there's personal influence, you know? So like for me as a team member, the first thing when I start to see my influence on my team start to slack a little bit is that I start to ask some really, really clearly defining and maybe some humble questions along the way. Like, am I in a lane that I shouldn't be in, that I'm just not great in? And should I be giving this away to somebody else on the team? Because there's nothing that builds credibility a little bit faster and allows you to get some of that influence back than actually letting your team know, like in a humble way of like, hey, I'm a work in progress too. I'm working on this. Mm-hmm. Like, what can I do to get better and get that feedback, and then make some adjustments along the way? And but self-awareness is a huge deal. Like if you don't have self-awareness, there's a pretty good chance you're never going to get your influence back. So grow in self-awareness and be able to make some of those hard decisions. But yeah, a company's influence, that's you brought up a great point. Part of the assessments that we do on team-wide assessments is we literally start with just finding out, like, do we have the right people sitting in the right seats? How do we measure it? And let's figure it out. And if people are sitting in seats that they're not happy with, let's figure out what makes them happy.
Yeah, I'm curious your perspective on this and your experience, because I've seen mixed results from this, and this is leading by consensus. There's been times where I've been involved in organizations that are trying to get something done, and I understand the heart behind it of saying, hey, we're going to lead by consensus. We're going to get everybody in a room, and we're going to have 15 people here all trying to give us their opinion on what we should do. And while I get the heart of it, right, you don't want to leave anybody out. You don't want anybody to feel bad. I've just never really seen a positive outcome by having, I guess, maybe too broad of a consensus, right? I mean, not to go the extreme the other way where it's just one guy, doesn't include anyone, making decisions. But what's your thoughts on that leadership style of, leading by consensus? What's the pros and cons of that?
I think there's a time and a place for different styles of leadership. I don't think the executive boardroom is one of those places. I think specifically, so from some working with, nonprofit groups to really, really fast-paced executive teams, and even some church. I've seen it all. I've seen it all. Consensus leadership really leans towards a lot of lobbying, and it's very slow. And it's just not transparent. And you want to know why, like, the government is so dysfunctional? It's because we don't have leaders leading in their spaces of expertise.
That's right.
And the reason why it's like, I would not even flirt with the idea that, like, the Trump administration is a dream scenario, not even close. But I will say, like, the reason why things feel incredibly awkward is because he's deployed an executive style of decision making into a lot of those things. And so for the good or for the bad, like we have people that have been recognized as being experts in specific areas, and they've been given authority to be able to make those decisions and recommendations, and they move fast. So you have to understand the trade-off. Consensus is slow, could be safe. More times than not, though, it's a little bit destructive because of the lobbying that takes place behind the scenes to be able to make consensus happen. Executive style leadership in which we champion leaders, we champion experts in their fields, we give them the authority and the responsibilities to run. It's fast, but it can be messy.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pull on your experience in church leadership, because I feel like this is a great, church leadership and the way that churches are run. It's a very fascinating kind of, it's kind of a, it runs a little different, runs the same. Like it's just very nuanced. And I think one of the aspects that I want to ask you about is, the idea of maybe you're coming into vision and everybody's on board and there's some growth, there's some positive results. And I'm talking about from a leadership perspective, right? And then that influence kind of starts to wane a little bit. And now with the growth comes obviously additional problems that maybe you didn't have, right? And I think that kind of just throwing into the mix, you also have, a lot of times, a lot of volunteers who are just trying to do the best they can with what they have. And you have to rely on that in a church organization, right? Because that's kind of part of how you feel, get things done. And so I'm curious this, right? With all those kind of nuances, if the vision is strong, but then you start to see it wane as a leader, what is a way to kind of, regain some direction, kind of steer the ship in the right way without obviously just being an authoritarian, dictator and then obviously breaking things? Like, what's kind of that balance of dealing with paid staff, volunteers, congregation? How does a leader actually navigate that and get it back on course?
Man, I've seen it play out for the good and for the bad in so many different ways. And the number one thing that I see a lot that leaders sometimes struggle with, especially when things are going well, is they forget that a primary centric purpose of the local church is to make disciples, And so what ends up happening is that the senior leader, he's leading, starts off, say maybe a church of 200 or 300 people. And boy, it's really easy for the church staff to feel like they're family when you have a church of 200 or 300 people. Like the relationships are close, it's kicking, and like we're seeing, like Christ-centric community exists between staff members. They don't feel alone, and they're doing things. They're going over to the lead pastor's house on a Friday night for a barbecue. The kids are all best friends with each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right.
And that in itself, like, all of a sudden has an overflow to it, and that will, like, people will go, man, these people seem happy. They seems like they're like, okay, great. The worship's not horrible on a Sunday morning. The speaking is pretty good, and okay, great. This is a place that we can belong. And then all of a sudden, it's like that church then goes from 2 to 300, then it maybe hits 500. The dynamics start to change a little bit. The staff has to get a little bit bigger. And then, now you have to start thinking about leadership pipeline and making sure that, at the same time, like, don't forget, like, we're still making disciples. And then all of a sudden the church hits 1,000. And now it's like, this is totally different. Now we got all these different programs that we're supporting. Oh yeah, we better make sure we're still making disciples, but we got this leadership pipeline in place. But now the staff isn't hanging out together. They barely know each other anymore. And then 2,000 hits, it's just like, okay, great. The only time that we're going to see each other is on a quarterly vision night in which our lead pastor gets up and talks to thousands of people. And that's the only time that we're actually getting to hang out with him is when he's on a stage. Sound familiar?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So to answer your question is so I've seen it going well, and I've seen it going bad. The churches that I've seen it go well at is that it's when the lead pastor in that pastoral team of those large environments, when they recognize that their first level of disciple making still and will always be their staff, is they keep those guys close. They keep the women that are on their team, the men that are on their team, and their families. Like I know a pastor that like he establishes scholarship funds for the kids of the pastors that are on their team. Like he makes sure that he hand delivers Christmas presents every year to their home. Like even though he's got a church of 20,000, like he makes sure that the people that are directly on the staff, even though he's got a pretty big team, he figures out ways to making sure that there's like that family proximity and discipleship making. It's steer tier one. That's it. This is like, it was the same when we were 200. Now it's going to be the same when we're 20,000. But our staff is still the main primary discipleship engine and also what we develop. The churches that get it wrong and they fail and where they start losing some of that credibility and authority and where things start to fall off, it's because they start running it a little bit more like a worldly organization instead of a kingdom organization. And don't get me wrong, they're both complicated, but they're different.
Sure. No, that's really good. And as we get ready to kind of just land the plane on this, is there any things that we talked about within this idea of the framework, or any of the questions, any context you want to just add to the conversation before we close out?
I think just, when we start talking about mindset, vision, structure, then strategy, and I'd say there's one more S in the bottom, and that's our systems. And, so specifically when we're running our teams, I've seen people fall more in love with their systems than the outcomes that they produce. And like I had this one leader that I was coaching forever, and I kept on showing up to his Tuesday morning staff meeting, and he kept on calling this program that he developed his proven process. And it was a kind of like a leadership class, and he called it the proven process, and it was going to be like every Wednesday afternoon at 3:00 p.m. Like he was going to invite 100 people to this thing, and he was putting all these company resources into the proven process. And I kept on coming back to him. I was like, bro, you have 2 people showing up to your proven process. You have nobody being developed into leadership. From your proven process, we've spent literally about $250,000 on your proven process. And the only thing that you're proving is that you're wasting your time and you're spending resources and you're exhausting yourself. But because he created it, this system, like he was emotionally and psychologically invested in this thing that he had self-branded as the proven process. And it was embarrassing, to be honest with you. But it showed me, like, sometimes we fall in love with our systems because we're emotionally invested, right? We have to be willing to make hard turns when it comes to the outcomes that they're producing.
I see this all the time in the entrepreneur space, right? You're developing an idea and maybe the market has moved on, the time has changed, but you're still holding on to it. And it could be one of the hardest things to really just take a look in the mirror and go, okay, is this really what's needed for the time? And maybe I got to just table this or, shift gears. So I can see how that could also take place in a church setting. This is a great conversation, Michael. I really appreciate your time. I know that you're going to be a returning guest because there's so many things I didn't ask you. So looking forward to that. If people want to get connected with you, find out more about your coaching, where can they find that information?
Check out, we just launched a new self-branded page, so michaelkingjr.com. So check that out there, and you'll see access to all the companies that I'm responsible for, access to my social platforms, the Level Up Leader podcast, and all the media that we create.
Awesome. Thank you again for your time, Michael.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.